All right, we're rolling. We're starting a little bit late due to some technical difficulties. I'm told it was a problem with the flux capacitors were not aligned correctly with the dilithium crystals. So now that we've got that all taken care of, we're going to get started. I'm Michael Waite. This is the OpenShift Commons Briefings Operator Hours, and today we are 10 minutes behind due to technical difficulties, but we are going to talk about compliance with containers and cloud. And we have Eric Carter from Sysdig. Eric's the Director of Product Marketing, and we have our very own Dave Muir from Red Hat, who's the Global Solutions Architect for security software vendors. Dialing in, videoing in from Florida. Where are you coming from, Eric? You're in California?
Yeah, I am in the San Francisco Bay Area, kind of extreme East Bay, and the sun is shining today.
Yeah, is it windy? Or I thought you were in Concord. Is Concord, California somewhere around there in that area?
Exactly, yeah. And it has been windy over the past couple of days. I don't know how you knew that, but if you go
I,
out a little further is where all the windmill farms and everything are, right? So
you know how I
hopefully,
know that it's windy there? Because well, before COVID, I used to travel at least twice a year to San Francisco, and it's just always windy. I mean, you
yeah,
don't have to be a mind reader to say, oh, it's windy today, huh?
yeah,
But
especially in the
yeah, no,
evenings. Yeah.
I like that town. So you're joining us here from Sysdig. How long have you been there?
Yeah, I've been with Sysdig now for over 3 years, which in startup land is pretty long time, I suppose.
Yeah.
We were talking just before, before that I was at the little startup Hedvig, yeah, and what was interesting about that is that was kind of founded by the guy who created an open source Cassandra while he was at Facebook. So that was kind of my ability to get into this whole world of like, open source and containers and so on. And what's, even Sysdig now uses Cassandra. It's like all over the place. So that was good
Yeah.
experience. And yep. And now we're here and pretty heavily focused on adding value to what you guys are doing at Red Hat.
Cool. So Sysdig, what do they do?
We provide kind of what we would call secure DevOps tooling or the secure DevOps platform. Think about it as a couple of things, right? It's trying to give you visibility into all of these containers and these clusters that are spun up on across all these different clouds. Visibility that helps you with A, security, right? You can't secure what you can't see, and B, like performance and health, right? And when you combine those two things, you kind of got a really good grip on what's really happening in my modern application environment. And so
Right.
it's our job to provide those solutions and to give you a keen insight into those things.
Well, that's fair enough. I know Sysdig is a household word in our team. I mean, my team specifically, we work with third-party software vendors to get their apps tested and certified on the Red Hat portfolio, whether it's OpenStack or OpenShift or Ansible or Red Hat Linux or what have you. You folks have a operator for OpenShift, is that right?
Yes, we do. So when that sort of framework, matured and we were invited to do so, we have that so that you can spin up. Basically, it helps to spin up and maintain the agent side of what we do, which is that piece that's going to kind of sit on your OpenShift and Kubernetes nodes and discover what's going on out there.
Sure. Okay. Well, what are we here to talk about today? Security, containers in the cloud. Dave Muir, what's your take on these folks from Sysdig? Are they legit?
Nah, they're not legit. No, absolutely. Yeah. Part of my role is managing and working with these great partners like Sysdig. Sysdig's one of our top tier partners and have been working with them for a while now. I actually had some history with Sysdig as well. Before Red Hat, I was at a company called Black Duck and Synopsys, and I was a partner of Sysdig as well. So they're definitely legit. Definitely legit. That's why we're having them on here on the show. And by the way, Mike, as you know, I just want to pop this up for everybody. Um,
excited when I get up in the morning.
Yeah.
Eric, tell me about that. Why is compliance something that's important for customers?
You're making me laugh because I've done several sessions on the topic, and while I kind of agree with you that in there I would always throw this kind of slide to lighten things up that says resistance is futile, right? These things are honest. We have to we have to do them, and it's for good reason, right? I mean, obviously security and compliance tied together. You're going to achieve compliance by making sure you have security, but it's like you don't just have to be like a financial services to be subject to it, right? You've got other companies like our joint customer Ford. They've, regulated industry. You gotta maintain sort of, and you want to get recognized for it, right? Because it's going to give your customers the confidence that you're protecting me as a user, you're protecting my data, you're helping, make sure that I don't fall subject to fraud. And so, it can be very dry, but it's also, there's so many different standards. And when we think about the boogeyman that can come to bear if I'm a credit card provider or some payment processor, right? It's like, oh, a lot of bad stuff can happen if I don't cover my bases. And part of what we want to talk about today is like, well, how is that? How is that for containers in OpenShift, right? Is it different, or are there things that I need to know, or what are the best practices? And so we thought we would get into that at some point.
Yeah, and I would say, Michael, if you can automate your ethics training, wouldn't you be excited about that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I
That's
mean,
right.
like,
Yeah.
I literally sit there and have it on mute, and I just go tab, 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 and then you get to the very end and you take the test, and hopefully you get 10 out of 10 right, but sometimes you have
hopefully
to.
the questions aren't too tricky, right? Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
love to have a way to automate my compliance training. How does Sysdig help with compliance automation?
There you go.
Yeah, there are a number of things that we do, and we kind of break down kind of the different stages into, what do I do to try and make sure I'm compliant while I'm building stuff? What do I do to try and make sure I'm compliant when I'm running stuff? And then when the bad stuff happens, what do I do to help uncover what was it that happened and provide proof, right? That, okay, we figured it out, we know what it is, we're blocking it going forward. So we have a little bit in each one of those sections, I think, that we can talk about. And, everything from vulnerability scanning on the front end through your CI/CD pipelines to checking for things in runtime, and then having forensics records, right, for containers. Dave, don't you kind of have a slide that positions us sort of in the stack? Do you want to show that?
You bet.
So that we kind of get that context? I don't know. I thought it might make sense at this point.
Yeah, good segue. And if you're looking at the monthly topics or monthly topics on the right, you see there, they actually map to a framework that we've built. Now, this is a bit of an eye chart, might be tough to read, but this gives our joint customers and our partners and even internal Red Hatters a better understanding of, number one, the security categories, and number two, where they fit into a DevOps pipeline. And so it's a great tool to take to a customer, for example, and say, hey, are you thinking about compliance audit, not only at the running cluster, but during build automation, like you just said, Eric? Or are you thinking
the old shift left, right, Dave?
That's right. That's right. And then we could take this a next level and, as you mentioned, produce a solution, a joint solution with Sysdig here in Red Hat, where we can say, okay, now you've got these items covered. This can be the starter conversation of ensuring that you have everything where you need it at certain points in the pipeline. So this can absolutely help you get started, because it is an overwhelming, situation, right? You've got all these services that you have to secure, and where do you get started?
Yeah,
so
this can look a little complex on its own, but I think the key you threw in earlier was automation, right? But you take this and multiply it by the number of containers, the number of clusters, the number of clouds, and trying to do this in a more manual fashion with X number of tools can be pretty challenging. So yeah, this is this is an interesting visual because you've got even more phases than I mentioned, but I think this tells the story in fine detail. And if you look at, like, there's different things about audit. Audit's a big word, obviously, in the compliance world. Controls. I kind of break down, in my mind, the things you need to do for compliance into kind of 3 buckets. There may be more, but this is the world according to Eric. And one is that we have implemented controls, right? Now, standards that are out there, NIST, PCI, SOC 2, there are certain, they're obviously saying protect access, protect your data, and so on, but they're not saying you're going to do this to actually achieve it, or you're going to use these tools to actually achieve it. That's on you. So 1, put in controls. 2, validate and test those controls. Like we went through this at Sysdig, trying to get SOC 2 compliant. The first one is like SOC 2 type 1, right? Where you've outlined your controls that you've put in place for all these protections of user data, access, who's doing what, and you're proving it. You're validating and testing it and then proving it at one point in time. To get SOC 2 type 2, you're proving that this is repeatable over and over and over again. So it's controls, it's validation and testing, and then I always call the third thing in my mind as the proof. There's always someone that wants to see the document. Sometimes when you're actually trying to get that stamp, that's an auditor of some third party type, and then other times it's your internal compliance teams or security teams. And so if you can get controls in place, you can make sure it is easily testable and hopefully automated, like you pointed out, and then you have some trail to prove it. That's great stuff. And I think we're in a unique position at Sysdig, just because of the way that we have implemented. As we were prepping for this call, we were talking about what's the background on Sysdig. Where the heck do you guys come from? What's the name all about, right? Obviously, if you take the two apart, you're digging systems. But our founder, Loris, he was one of the Wireshark co-creators, right? And if most people light up when you say Wireshark because they're using it in their career. In fact, I was doing some Google searches for something completely unrelated yesterday for my home, and something came up that said, oh, here I've discovered this thing with Wireshark. It happened to be some router I was trying to figure out. So Wireshark was all about capturing deep level information, storing it so that you could go through it. And this is more about network. Laura said, containers are coming. There's a challenge with understanding what's happening in the container. What can we do to get that low level information and then capture it? Because containers come and go. And so we do that. That's one of the unique things that we do is kind of observe your systems at a system call level and then be able to have the deep information. A lot of times it's like, well, do I even need that information? You need it when you need it, especially from a compliance perspective. So that's kind of a little bit about where we came from, and people that use our tooling go, oh yeah, I see that Wireshark heritage when I'm in there doing X, Y, or Z, right? So
Hey,
cool
Eric,
background and cool people. Yep.
Let me ask you a question. So if you were a database vendor, I understand how databases work. I mean, I don't understand the internal workings of them, but I get it that there's, you install a database, you allocate storage to it, you allocate resources, and you build your tables, and then people access it and run their little reports and so forth. And whether it's in the cloud or like a distributed database, in Kubernetes or something more traditional that's like on premise. What does a Sysdig deployment look like? Like, how do I get my hands around what it is and what it looks like? Sure.
You could think about Sysdig as having 2 parts. One we talked about earlier when in context of operator, where you're deploying this. We call it an agent. You can call it whatever you want. Now, typically in an OpenShift environment, you just set that up as a daemon set so that any new node that gets put up based on workload or scaling, one of these is going to appear there, right? And that's the part that's detecting, observing those system calls, tapping into Kube API, other data sources, and getting the insights, right? And we can talk a little bit more about what those are in just a second. But then that data gets relayed back to a back end, right? Now, by and large, the majority of our customers are now using our SaaS backend. So that means we have a cloud-based place where your data goes, you have your account, it's secure, and you log in there to see, here's the behavior, here's what's happening, here's what I need to watch out for. You log in there to set up your policies and so on. So those are the two pieces. And what's one of the things that I hear from customers is like, yeah, we just spin up that agent and you start discovering stuff. And that means that a container that starts talking and maybe talking to other containers, we see that. And we can draw you a map of that. We know that that container is you were talking about databases, that's MySQL, and it's talking to a WordPress front end, right? We can show you that if anything odd starts to happen, or if the performance breaks down, or if a process other than, this is one of the cool things too, if a process other than MySQL starts running in that container, that's probably a problem. You know, Bitcoin mining is one of the classic examples, right? We can detect that. And so a lot of what I'm describing here, by the way, Mike, is the architecture of the commercial side, what we do. Sysdig Secure effectively is the product. But I think it's important to mention the open source projects as well, right? Because I know we share that in terms of DNA of embracing and wanting open source to be a part of who we are. Sysdig, what I lovingly call lowercase Sysdig, was the open source project that for Sysdig as a company. It was all about troubleshooting Linux and containers. And then the depth of information we saw and the kind of things that we were able to discover lent itself as well to more of the security lens. And that started the open source project Falco. I know Dave's heard of Falco. Mike, I don't know how familiar you are. Falco has subsequently been donated to the CNCF. So it's not Sysdig anymore in that sense, but it was started and created for us and now, or by us, and now it's like a Kubernetes runtime security tool. Falco is all about set up these rules to detect the bad things or the things you don't want happening on your systems, relay that back, and let's be able to take some action at that point. So those are the things on top of which we built what I was describing with the agent and the SaaS backend and so on. And those are all key parts to
So
understanding.
in Mike Waite terms, there's an agent that sits on all the various different nodes. They phone home to the mothership. What about for customers who have certain, strict requirements on where their data can sit? Meaning there's I'm thinking 3-letter agencies, I'm thinking government, I'm thinking, other companies or deployments like that. How do they use Sysdig?
Yeah, increasingly, well, first of all, we are starting to put more SaaS backends in region where, let's say, a company in Germany who has that requirement, it's in Frankfurt, it's wholly owned there. Having said that, let's take a step back. You guys have a lot of customers that fall into that ilk, right?
Right.
They're looking for ironclad solutions. That's what OpenShift provides, right?
Yep.
They're looking, and so for a lot of our joint customers in the past, it's all been on-prem or self-hosted, which we support as well. And I've started to shift off of the on-prem term more to the self-hosted because sometimes now that's my private instance in Google, for instance, where the customer owns everything. It's not the public service. Yeah, it's in the cloud, but we can do it in a customer's data center as well. So that's a demand for many of those customers, 3-letter agencies you mentioned, and we can meet that need. They just have more to manage at that point, right?
Yep. I'd like to just take a moment and remind you that we're live on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and others. If you're watching Eric and Dave here and you're on one of those other sites and you have a question, drop it in the chat window down at the bottom, and then our magic will make that automatically appear over here on our interface. And I'd like to today's challenge is stump the speakers. So apparently Eric is unstumpable. So if you have any questions for Eric or Dave, please drop them in chat and we'll address them. Back to you, Dave.
I might be unstumpable on music trivia, but let's see what happens.
Yeah, well, I can see your drum kit in the background, so hopefully you're going to be giving us. Hopefully at the end he'll be breaking out the Eric Sysdig band.
There you go.
Well, I've got a question, and this is going to be a softball, but because we're talking about deployment, Eric, let's say a customer has multiple clusters, not all OpenShift, maybe Kubernetes on-prem. I see you're smiling.
Yeah.
How
Yeah,
would
my
they, how
brain
would
was
they,
already going there before you
yeah,
asked the question, and I was like, okay,
yeah,
how do I
how would they
deal with this
deploy,
topic?
right? How would they deploy
Yeah,
Sysdig agent on that entire fleet?
yeah. Um,
I'm a bad actor.
let's
By the way.
No, it's great. Let's talk about it. So first of all, and this is important because organizations can get overwhelmed by the number of, their business grows or they're suddenly they've got OpenShift and they've got GKE and EKS and other, so how do I deal with that environment just from a sheer management standpoint? And how do I deal with that environment, obviously, then from a compliance standpoint? And I will say the perfect segue is that one of the things that we have done together, and this has brought you and me together, Dave, frankly, is the fact that you guys have a tool called Advanced Cluster Management. Let's make sure I get that
That's
right.
right. Yeah.
Sometimes we lovingly say RACM for the Red Hat Advanced Cluster Management.
As do we. Yeah.
And the goal of that is obviously to help you do exactly what you were leading toward, which is manage diverse container Kubernetes deployments, whatever they might be. And beyond management, I know there's a deep focus on risk governance or governance, risk, and compliance, right? So that we can say GRC, right? And yeah, so what that has let us do together is to ensure that any cluster that's there that's under management, that you want to make sure that the tooling, whether that's open source Falco or whether that's commercial Sysdig, that the tooling is properly deployed and that those protections are in place, right? And that's the thing. It's interesting because we call that a policy. Basically, there's a RACM policy that says make sure every node has this agent spun up, and you're green or you're not green. And if you're not green, you might be at risk, right? And so that's an important consideration. And the good news is that, and this is one reason why people choose Sysdig, is that you don't have to have multiple Sysdig back ends in order to deal with that environment, right? You can still have one, and we will consolidate and let you visualize and or let you drill into one or the other, which we can get into if I have time to show the demo. So anyway, I'll pause, and maybe you could say a little bit more about RACM from your perspective.
Well, you said it very well. There are a couple of things that RACM provides, as you mentioned, the policy engine, which is not compliance policy per se, although it does have some compliance in it, but it's ensuring that applications, like you mentioned, are installed and properly configured in the fleet that you want to manage. Another big use case for RACM is basically, think about, as a developer, I think about CRUD, right? Create, read, update, delete. And RACM helps you to create, delete, update any cluster anywhere, that you want to manage, and visualize that as well. And then there's another sort of three-legged stool, another leg of RACM that provides application monitoring and analysis from like a GitOps perspective. So you can see how apps flow through your clusters. So yeah, that is RACM, or Advanced Cluster Manager, and yeah, Sysdig was the first integration that we've built, or that you guys built, for that policy deployment integration. So we're pretty excited about it.
And by the way, I think all that stuff's out on GitHub.
It is
Open.
right.
Open. Right.
Open source. Yeah, you can. And you could probably comment on this. It wasn't a very big lift to create that integration. I mean, there's no real code changes that a partner would need to do, or that someone needs to do to create a policy. It's all YAML based.
Yeah.
And if you have an operator, it's really easy. Yeah.
Drop in the YAML and it starts happening, right? And then it shows up. You get your insights in the RACM UI.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I think one of the things that I just wanted to drive toward as we're thinking about compliance for containers in cloud, because I think this will allow both of us to kind of showcase a little bit of how we do it, is kind of the things that the things to think about, right? One of the first ones, and I mentioned it's like, yeah, we want to protect users and data and so on. And even at Sysdig, we had to prove who's got access to what. One of the first ones is all about access control, right? Is like, make sure that this is all buttoned up and tightened down. And I think that's a big part of what the platform of OpenShift does in its own, right? To help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So OpenShift, if you compare OpenShift and just sort of upstream vanilla Kubernetes, there are a lot of services that involve security that we add on top of OpenShift. And you think about things like just identity providers. You get a default set of identity providers out of the box from OpenShift that you can choose from. You can obviously bring in your own OpenShift. Red Hat's all about customer choice and being open about that. So, which is why we love our partners in our ecosystem, because Red Hat can't do everything, right? Red Hat can't secure everything. And we can't secure the platform, and then we rely on folks like Sysdig to help us shift left, to help secure the pipeline, and to provide that deep, forensics type information that you all do. But you also think about things like RBAC, right? RBAC is the authorization of access control, allowing users to be part of a namespace or a project, or allowing a pod to actually run in a certain project. So RBAC by default is on in OpenShift, whereas in vanilla Kubernetes you have to start it with a flag when you start up the cluster. And so those are the type of things that OpenShift has done to secure the platform. And then obviously Sysdig helps to ensure that we're compliant, right? Compliant around those things. So we built this, and we can talk about this as well. Earlier this year, the OpenShift team created a document called the OpenShift 4 Hardening Guidelines, which was based on the CIS benchmarks. I know Sysdig was very helpful in that process as well, as we shared those with you early on before we published it. But it's a huge document, right? It's a spreadsheet with 6 different tabs, and I think it's now in a PDF format. It's 50-some pages, maybe even more, a couple hundred pages. And it is a bear to just go through that and say, well, am I compliant with this benchmark? Do I have to run this command? OpenShift OpenShift does have a lot of those things turned on by default, but still, you need the documentation, you need the report, the audit to ensure that. And of course, right, Eric, that's what Sysdig would do for you.
Yeah, and try to make it a little bit easier to see, again, greens and reds, and here's some remediation tips and so on. So yeah. So I think that on the front end, you want to be able to check that your environment against those best practices. That again includes that authentication. More and more people are driving toward the principle of least privilege. Eric Carter, the marketing guy, should not be able to modify our running production SaaS solution in any way, shape, or form. We'll make sure I don't have that access, right? I don't have the root password or whatever it might be, right? So that's important. And I think the other thing is understanding what you have out there and is it configured correctly, right? And that's a lot of what you were highlighting. You try to do that by default, but are you sure? Are you checking it on a regular basis? There's that whole concept of drift, whether it's with your environment or your container, right? It was okay yesterday, but now it's different. You really want to know what's running at any given time. You want to know, is it configured the right way? And is it configured the way that we said we would when we achieve PCI compliance, as an example?
Right.
Because if it's not, then we're at risk if those auditors show up, and we were talking about, whether that's once a year or more frequently, right? And so you want to manage that risk. You want to flag misconfigurations as best you can. You want to run the benchmarks. And so now we know our platform hopefully is in the best shape that it can be. And so part of this is all about compliance of the platform. And part of it then will shift into, are my workloads themselves set up correctly, right? And I think we both have a hand in this whole idea of checking things before we even decide to have them orchestrated or have them spun up in our OpenShift environment.
Yeah, and so you mentioned shift left earlier, and we think about compliance and all those frameworks we talked about, PCI, others as well. Is the build adding those checks to Sysdig help you with making sure your images are compliant, your application's compliant? How much of those benchmarks are handled, and properly documented or whatever if you do shift left? Make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think a lot, right? Because one of the things you can do, one of the well, let me back up. One of the challenges is it's so easy in the world of containers to just go get something, whether it's off of your Red Hat catalog or whatever it's being called these days, or Docker Hub or whatever. I get this, and I got this container, and now I can basically start using it. But I should probably check for a few things first. And again, part of those configuration checks might be, is this container set to run as root? That's one of my favorite ones, right? Which is like, it probably doesn't need to be, and you should modify that before you decide to run it. You should check also that this thing that was uploaded a month ago doesn't have a bunch of known vulnerabilities in it, right? And these are all part and parcel to due diligence for compliance, understanding what's there, fixing it. So we do help with that, right? And we can help you even outside of the context of the repository of the registry, implementing this with things like Jenkins, Tekton, other CI/CD tooling, so that we can have the developer understand right within the tool that they know and love. Oh, this OS package needs to be fixed. This third-party library has a vulnerability. This thing has a password file in it that probably shouldn't be there. This container is configured wrong, right? And so those all will help with the whole equation. Again, that's a control. And inside Sysdig, we've pre-built policies for PCI, for NIST, and for other things that I'll show you in a minute, but that will help you get your best leg forward and have that. That's a control that you can prove is in place.
Right. And so do you see a lot of companies breaking builds and or doing things like admission controls? So for example, if you fail a certain compliance check, your image won't be allowed in this cluster type thing. You see a lot of that, and how does Sysdig help?
I see a lot of folks that don't like that
Yeah.
because it stops progress. But we are seeing more and more folks using admission controllers, like making sure that it's set up. Hey, this didn't pass that scan. It's not going into the cluster, right? And we have some tooling within Sysdig to help with that. Kubernetes admission controllers, control that, and yeah, more and more that's being adopted. It's irritating because you thought you were good and you were going to go live in the next 30 minutes, and then it's not admitted. So you got to go figure out what it is, and fix it. That's the right thing to do, because the last thing you want is to get in a rush and have that exposed, whatever might be out in production, and someone take advantage of that. And it's like, reminds me that human error is one of the biggest issues here. It's like getting in too much of a hurry. Gartner said something like, I got a quote here, I'm going to read it. 99% of cloud security failures through 2023 will be the customer's fault, like meaning the user, the human.
Eric, I wanted to ask you, so it certainly sounds like you have a lot of opinions. Are they just the world according to Eric, or let's talk about like the customers for a second, and like aha moments, and kind of like what you just said, right? Like, whatever the percentage was, it's like pilot error, user error. What have you've been there for quite some time. I'm sure you get pulled into customer conversations all the time. What are some of the top like aha moments that a customer will be like, light dawns on Rocky Head? Can you share any of those with us? Like,
Well,
we're gonna do this all ourselves. We're gonna roll. And actually, let me give you a 20-year backup to this question. So, I was a solutions architect when I started at Red Hat in 2002, and I had a couple reps that I was supporting, and we're out there selling to Goldman or more, or trying to. And we were trying to sell Linux, and we were trying to sell. People wanted us to sell them on open source first, and like we were trying to sell everything except for our own products because, and then we were competing against internal IT teams who were like threatened by Red Hat because we were going to take away their crown of like the Linux king, and they're like, well, we can do this ourselves, and if we pay Red Hat for that, then what am I going to do? And like, do you see any of that from the security and compliance space? Do customers feel, are there IT teams that are saying like, we got this, we can handle this, we're good enough?
Yeah, it is a definite challenge. A lot of especially because a lot of the kind of cloud native stuff sort of starts. It's not a huge, hasn't been as huge as like our traditional environment with VMware or something like that. And so these teams do feel like they've got it nailed. It's funny because we're talking about chiplet image scanning. People seem to get that, probably because we're used to virus scanning and all that stuff. But sometimes now this team that got so excited and actually has done great work is now going to run something that's important to the business in production. And guess who shows up? It's the security and compliance team that wasn't invited to the party, and it stops, right? And part of that stoppage, say, hey, but we scanned our images, and they're like, yeah, that's fine, but have you done these other things that we've always had in place in our traditional environments? And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is no because it was just too complicated. It would slow them down. Runtime security is one of those things, right? It's like, oh, I didn't even know. Can't we just use what we were using? And it's like, no, I didn't know that containers would be different. I didn't know that the fact that a container might live 5 minutes or less or something would be a challenge, but it is. And so there's that aha moment. Now we are seeing companies get it. I use, and I can use this publicly because they're our joint, and we rewarded them last year. Ford, right? Ford, I feel like, even though they're a 100-year-old automobile manufacturer, they did it right. They knew they wanted to get into this world, number one, and there was a small team. But then they almost held their own mini conference inside of Ford and brought in all those stakeholders. You rattled off a bunch of them a second ago, Mike, but it's like the compliance team, the developers, yes, us, the DevOps team, security teams, and they said, what do you think you're going to need? What is important to you in this environment? What are you worried about? And then they defined what they wanted to achieve, each one of those groups, what they felt was important. Then they started searching for solutions, right? And clearly the secure platform, OpenShift in spades, right? And then they put Sysdig through the ringer, but they liked, again, the fact that we were able to help across the different phases, right? Because the developers were like, okay, make it easy for me to know there's a vulnerability, check. The DevOps team, make sure that there's no surprises when something's running and I don't notice that someone has put a Bitcoin mining thing out there and it's been running for 30 days, make sure I can see that. And then obviously you've got incident response teams, security operations. How do you help me if a container isn't running anymore? So those are all things. And then again, not everyone does it that way. Sometimes our invitation into an account is because there's an oh crap moment.
I was gonna say, is it always, what percentage of the time you brought in because of a fire drill, as opposed to people who are just like, let's plan this out the right way? What is it? 50-50,
well,
80-20?
Yeah, it's probably, I would say this, if you go back, you've been here 3 years. If you go back 3 years, the time we were being brought in was when they didn't realize that this was going to be a different world. And then it was probably more 60% of people were reacting, 40% were being proactive. That's probably flipped at this point. People are getting more and more educated. They're starting to build this stuff in before they get too big, and so on. So that's a blessing for us. We would much rather be baked in earlier. The partnership with you guys helps with that too, because see that slide that they were showing earlier? You get that in front of someone and they start going, oh, I didn't even think about that. Let me do this before I even get too far in this project. Ford, again, perfect example. But again, sometimes when we can come in and be the hero, though, that feels good too, right? It's like, oh, you're having a hard time seeing that? Spin up this agent. And then it's like, okay, click here and there, and then see, now you're able to see what's going on. And that, that makes fans for Sysdig as well.
I got another question. I know we have plenty of time here, but I work with lots of software vendors. It seems like everybody's a security vendor, everybody's a APM vendor, and like there's endpoint security, there's secret security, there's compliance and, whatever. Is there one company that provides a fully secure environment, or do customers have to go buy from something from CyberArk and something from Synopsys and something from, you folks and something from, Thales Security or like how does that all work? I mean,
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's important in the sense that, yeah, there's no one solution that you you write your check and now I'm PCI or NIST compliant or SOC 2 compliant, first of all. Now, is it helpful to try and find a solution that bites off more so that you have more visibility without having to hop around between tools? Absolutely. And so, yeah, the point there is that, security compliance, it's never done by one tool. You've got someone doing firewall stuff, you've got, and not all of us can do all the things. We try and do more and more with every kind of release that we do. But we're not going to do the things that are inherent to the OpenShift platform, right? Because those things are covered. You got SE Linux, you've got all so many things that go into making it secure from day zero. But recently we launched cloud security. So you rattled off a bunch of vendors like cloud security posture management. It was really more about public cloud stuff. With something like we didn't do, but everyone kept asking, right? You're securing my workload. Can you help me secure the surrounding environment even better? Like if I'm running OpenShift on AWS or Azure, which is perfectly viable, we have a lot of customers doing that. Also, can you, at the same time you're showing me an issue with containers and Kubernetes, can you show me that part of why that issue happened was because my authentication or something was breached in the AWS side that then let them in, that let this chain of things happen. So we have now paired, and the pundits of the world, they believe that these two things are starting or need to come together, right? Visibility that shows the environment as well as the workload. And so our goal is to continue to expand that, to add more value from the same tool, but we're not a firewall company as an example. So yeah, you'll still need to work with a few, hopefully fewer than you did before.
Yeah, and Michael, I'd add to that. I think Red Hat's in such a unique position to help solve that puzzle. Right? There isn't one security vendor, as Eric mentioned. There never has been. We have seen some consolidation over the last couple of years. I think we'll see some more, but there's still going to be vendors that are very deep in terms of their expertise and technology in one security method than the other. And so that's why we created that framework, and why we're able to map now and see all the different partners and where they fit, where they might overlap, which features you want to look at to make that a little bit more consumable. Because like Eric has been saying, containers, Kubernetes, it's a new world, right? New world of understanding DevOps, all these new and different terminologies. Just learning DevOps itself is difficult, but then when you add security and all these different security methods and trying to secure your entire pipeline, it's very hard unless you have that framework or that knowledge of what pieces fit where. And I'm in a great position at Red Hat because I can see all of our partners and the expertise and what they do, and it's like a puzzle, right? Trying to figure out where Sysdig fits properly in that pipeline, where you mentioned Synopsys, and they do application analysis things very well, static analysis, interactive analysis. So there's a lot of complementary technologies out there, and it's just a matter of putting the right pieces together.
I think the good and the bad too, by the way, just real quick, is that there's always some innovator, right? And so there's open source stuff that comes along, and that's why we try to build on top of open source so that we capture some of that innovation. I think of OPA, but I mean, as far as ourselves, we're built on obviously our own stuff. Plus, we have Prometheus that we leverage, and now we're leveraging Cloud Custodian. There's all these different things that happen, and so just when you think you're done, there's something better and easier and it's going to solve that problem. And so you go check
Eric,
it out.
we got a question here from Mikey.
Sure.
How do you compare Sysdig with Calico Enterprise / cloud platform?
I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with Calico Enterprise in the sense that I don't consider. Are you guys, Dave?
Yeah, that's from Tigera.
It's not one of our primary like container Kubernetes monitoring or security kind of players.
Right. It's more complementary to a runtime analysis. So Tigera is the folks that create Calico. They're another partner
Okay.
of OpenShift, and yeah, they're more on the networking CNI type of functionality security methods.
Gotcha.
There might be a little bit of overlap, but they really focus on the network layer security versus what Sysdig does is runtime container security, things like that.
Yeah, and we're not controlling any network. We can give you visibility into what's happening on the network. So that would be one of the things that I would call out as a difference. We did recently enable the fact that something to help you simplify using what Kubernetes has for controlling networks, Kubernetes network security policies. And so we can help you visualize that and decide like, okay, do not allow that connection. And then we talked about YAML file earlier. Here's your YAML file to implement that. Go load it in and you're good to go. So yeah. Thanks for the assist there, Dave.
Sure. And I know we can run over to Eastern. I wonder if it's a good time now to try to do a demo.
Yeah, let's jump in if you guys don't mind, and we can just continue to. I'm going to go to Chrome. Let me know if you're seeing what I have.
You can see it. Yeah.
All right. So you see up here at the top, Sysdig platform, secure and monitor. We're not going to deal with the monitor part right now, but because we're talking about compliance. So what are we looking at? Well, this is actually new. Remember a second ago, I was like, oh, we are able to show you both your workload, which would be more thinking Kubernetes and containers, and the surrounding cloud that you might be running this on, right? And so I can go in and see things like cloud activity and understand what might be wrong that AWS is reporting back to me, more from the services and the things there, including like somebody's logged into AWS and they're not using multi-factor authentication. That goes down to the compliance standard of basically saying, control who has access and how, right? Or you can do this thing where we're able to overlay what we'll call composite, like, or with like the Kubernetes activity with the cloud activity, and then even drill down into a specific, part of that or in a specific namespace, and to see, oh, look, detect crypto miners, right? And so you can get an idea of the chain of things that might be happening. One of my favorite new views in this whole ball of wax is this idea of users, because sometimes it's the best of intentions that I'm doing something for my business, but I'm not knowing that I'm violating an important policy for NIST, right? And so I can go in and see something like, okay, Eric Lugo, who's got a big red, he keeps logging in without the right kind of authentication. If we get audited, we're going to be in trouble. So now I can go have a conversation with Eric, right? And make sure that this is all properly set up. And so this is the idea of being able to kind of have multiple levels of views. And I noticed, again, this is new, I'm getting the hang of it, but I noticed that I can do things like, here, I'm going to go back to, let's go to the component. I can even do things like, okay, if I can type in NIST, and it shows me the things that are happening that are contrary to a NIST best practice, or PCI, right? Now this is kind of your bird's eye level view, and you can start to do things like click into it and so on. So our goal is to give you, remember I said earlier, guys, visibility, right? So this is one level of visibility. If we draw it back into the build phase, I just want to show this real quick because I know we don't have a lot of time, but you'll look that out of the box because we're thinking about compliance. There's a bunch of things that we have just sort of added for you. And I was talking to one of our customers this morning. He's like, yeah, we just use what you've provided. This is an image scanning policy like for NIST. And what it does is it tells you, hey, according to the policy, right, you need to be checking for these things. And this is like exposed ports. How long has it been since you've actually done a check against this? Do you have, user set up as root? And so you can when these images are being spun up, before you push it into production, you can understand, how am I doing? How is it? Do I need to fix anything, right? So again, visibility and build. And then we also talked about the CIS benchmark. So you want to be able to check. This isn't our intellectual property, right, Dave? it's the Center for Internet Security, but
Right.
there are things that can, for instance, known in the industry as a best practice. And then to give you information on how, oh yeah, you're not doing that great. Right? Benchmark that we were chatting about.
Yeah. You broke up a little bit there, Eric, but
okay.
I think
Let me make sure I'm still close. Is it better now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this is all about the visibility into CIS benchmarks, everything from AWS to Kubernetes to OpenShift and so on.
Yeah.
We talked about runtime, right? Runtime is that I'm now running my container. These are things that I can't find with image scanning because it's often human-based. This is somebody's doing something suspicious. I love scrolling through here because like suspicious file system changes, right? Private credentials, suspicious network tool, unexpected, right? So these are those kind of things that we're able. This is built on top of that open source Falco, and again, you see in here some of the compliance controls. HIPAA FIM stands for File Integrity Monitoring, right? So we can help you understand, as an example, by applying these rules, observing the environment, if it's violated, to trigger an alert and even take some action. Like if it's violated, I can kill the container that it's happening in, spoil the fun of the hacker, right? And then OpenShift will spin up another one, typically, wherever that has some capacity to do so. And now we can go jump into action. Running shells in a container are our favorite demo, right? So again, we've tried to tool in things that are going to help you. And if you look at, let me see if I can go in here at some of these policies. I'm going to go into the library, right? We have tagged my screen the way it's, but I'll just show it from here. We've tagged these different rules that you can apply with different standard tags, right? So if I need to do NIST 853, I know that I probably need to be checking for crypto mining, outbound connections, and so on, right? And so again, helping you customize even, and this is all in the name of detecting that bad behavior. And then if something triggers, maybe you've got a security operations team watching, right? Oh, somebody is running a shell in a container. Where is that happening? What is it by? Oh man, SOC 2, our auditors are showing up tomorrow. I better get a handle on this, right? And then we give you the ability to respond. Key to it, again, key to compliance is proof. We give you a couple ways to do that. You can do an activity audit, and Dave, you'll recognize this, that what we're showing you here is the ability to pull in and understand what commands were being issued in the environment, what network activity, what was going on from a kubeexec standpoint, and what files were being manipulated.
Yeah.
So this is like tracing. And if I see the word shred, probably not good, right? This actual command is all about trying to shred that I was doing something. And good luck, you didn't get very far because we captured it. And our next level of detail would be like getting into our capture files, which we don't have to spend a lot of time on here, but capture files are effectively a dump. Now we're in Wireshark land, right? A dump of all of the system calls that were happening before, during, and after an incident. So now we're in the respond phase, and we're able to kind of filter through and see who was doing what, right? And we give you an interface as a jumping off point. So people that were familiar with our founders' kind of heritage around Wireshark will start to recognize this piece, right? So our goal is to give you visibility into the Kubernetes containers, OpenShift running private, OpenShift running in the public cloud, give you insights, into what's happening, and to give you out of the box things that are going to give you a leg up on being PCI, NIST, SOC 2, HIPAA compliant. It's not a magic bullet or magic wand, but it gets you farther. OpenShift plus Sysdig gets you pretty close to having the controls, the validation, the automation, and the proof, right? I think you're in much better shape.
I was even going to say, I think it can automate Michael's ethics course, right?
Yeah, we can script anything, man. We'll put it in a GitHub repository, and the rest. Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't you love those courses?
it's great.
So
Yeah, I like the new
I
feature
will.
here. I don't think I've seen
Yeah,
that yet.
it's a new way of visualizing, of drilling, and of sort of correlating cloud and Kubernetes and container activity.
Yeah,
So
nice.
you should jump in. I think you'll notice it still says beta here. We had a launch about a
Hey, Eric, we got a
week or two
question that
ago.
came in from YouTube.
Sure.
How does Sysdig stand next to compliance operator?
Compliance operator, is that an OpenShift
It is.
operator
Yeah,
from Red Hat?
it is.
I'm going to have Dave answer that question because I'm not an expert on compliance operator itself.
Yeah,
think-
and I'm not a big expert on the compliance operator. I know it does monitor some aspects of compliance, but it's not as enhanced, or and I would say Sysdig extends the compliance operator. I don't think there's an integration point at this time.
I can say that, yeah, I don't
Yeah.
believe so. No.
But when there is, Sysdig will obviously be the first ones we work with to get their information, published in OpenShift in that manner. But right now, compliance operators is nice if you're starting out, but I would say for enterprises and for folks who really need to comply with PCI and those frameworks, you're going to want to look at Sysdig.
And we do have the ability to sort of forward what we discover, the information that we have out, right?
Yeah.
So if there's a tool, I'm thinking about Rackham again as one of those things where,
Right.
in the future, I think in the next stage, it's like, can we not only set our policies there or get things set up, but can I also forward back so that I'm, like, once again, in the name of simplifying, seeing from one pane of glass, even if the data is coming from different sources.
That's a good point. With compliance operator, it's limited to one cluster, right? If you have multiple clusters, you won't have that single pane of glass. So, good question. Well, I think we're getting up to our hour, right, Michael? I don't know if I have any more questions for Eric. Do you, Michael, have any other questions?
Well, there's just, Mikey had one other one that, are Sysdig policies editable? And do you offer a service navigator?
So on the first part, policies, yes. Some of those you noticed have just like a slider. Oh, turn it on, turn it on. Inside of that, it's all based on Falco. You can modify those to fit your own needs. You can just modify what we've built. You can pull in, remember there was the little color Easter egg bubbles. You can pull those in and create a multi-faceted policy. The rules contribute to the policy, which then gets, starts monitoring environment. So that's good. A service navigator, I'm not sure what that means, other than we do give you the ability to kind of, we capture a lot of metadata, context information, so that you can drill in your views from cluster level. And this may not be in the right place, but cluster, see what the namespace looks like, go all the way down to pod, go all the way down to container, and all the way down to understand what process is running inside that container. And so between the monitor part that we do and the secure part, you have, we build you those views because we capture the context. And that's one of the challenges of cloud and container or cloud native environments is I don't care so much about host with IP address X. What I care about is an aggregate, my service running maybe across 20 nodes. In total, how is that doing? How's the namespace doing? How's the deployment doing? So we do give you that visibility. That may or may not be what Service Navigator meant, but that's what it connotes in my mind.
Yeah, I wonder, Mikey, if you meant something like a service mesh and how maybe Sysdig works with that. But feel free to post a clarifying question if you'd like.
Yeah, you mean things like Istio and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
They do a lot of awesome discovery, and we can capture. We don't have to kind of duplicate that. We can grab the information from an Istio through Prometheus as an example, and sort of join hands as Istio is doing its magic again to give you visibility into what is happening around the Istio part.
Cool. Well, we are over time, and my manager has been chatting me on Google Chat for the past 11 minutes. Like, where are you? So I need to bounce. Eric Carter from
Sounds good.
Sysdig, and Dave Muir from Red Hat. Thanks so much. For those who are either watching today or will be watching the reposted video, if anyone wants to get in contact with Dave or Eric, and you don't have their contact information, Dave Muir's home phone number is no,
I just
yeah,
I just got rid of that phone, by the way.
yeah, yeah. But send me an email address. My email address is waite, WAITE, at redhat.com, and I will get you connected with anyone at Sysdig or anyone on Dave Muir's team or anyone that you want to from the OpenShift product team. What more? Eric and Dave, any parting words?
Just, thanks for having me. Mike, Dave, and Chris behind the scenes. It's good. I mean, this is a big, broad topic. We just scratched the surface, but it's great to be on.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to have Sysdig on, and looking forward to our partnership together and the great things we're going to do.
All righty. It's a wrap.